these spiders can apparently be quite defensive, so I think it might be time to get up close and personal. For a continent whose spiders are notorious worldwide, it may come as a surprise that some of Australia's most spectacular species remain scarcely known and seldom, if ever, acknowledged. And one of these forgotten denizens of Down Under lives barely a stone's throw from the heart of Brisbane City. Less than an hour's drive from the bustling city centre lies Mount Nebo, its slopes bedecked in an alluring mix of lofty eucalypt woodlands interspersed by sheltered patches of luxuriant rainforest. It's a pleasant venture, with much of the drive being wondrously scenic, though even with this natural beauty, it can be a bit of a challenge to fully immerse oneself in the serenity of the route when you have a constant backlog of agitated motorcyclists pressing so far up your behind that it's bordering on being some sort of vehicular anal session. Our adventure begins here at Jolly's Lookout, which grants stunning views across the verdant acres of Samford Valley that in this case you'll unfortunately have to rely on your imagination to admire. But the suboptimal visibility mattered not to me, for I was drawn hither not by the prospect of a scenic view, but by the chance of encountering one of southeast Queensland's most awe-inspiring spiders, Xamiatus rubifrons. I've heard only very little about this spider, mostly coming from people who have kept them in captivity, yet the few tidbits of information I could garner were more than enough to pique my interest. For one, these spiders have a reputation for being exceedingly ill-tempered, to the point of making the infamous funnel webs appear positively tame by comparison. They're also capable of making a loud hissing noise by rubbing specialized hairs together, a defensive behavior known as stridulation. That, combined with their apparently large size and wicked red and black coloration, could make Xamiatus rubifrons one of Australia's most intimidating spiders. But before I could reach my verdict on that matter, I'd have to see one in the flesh. Xamiatus live a rather secretive life, dwelling in burrows from which they seldom, if ever, venture, and their lodgings are exceedingly cryptic. Many of the other burrowing spiders that share their habitat, like trapdoor spiders and funnel webs, decorate their dwellings with distinctive constructions from silken tubes to trip lines. Xamiatus, however, opt for a more minimalist style, living in plain, featureless burrows, barely even recognizable as the home site of a spider. And once you do manage to pick out one of their dwellings, you have to extract the spider, and that can be a task easier said than done. To rouse one of these introverted little beasties from its slumber, channeling one's inner fisherman can come in quite handy, which is how I found myself hunched over spider burrows, wielding a broken twig like a poor man's fishing rod, ever waiting for the resident spider to respond to the vibrational cues of my lure, whereupon I would loudly proclaim, "Fish on!" to prove that I can be a Temu Jeremy Wade as well as a Temu David Attenborough. That moment of glory, unfortunately, never had the chance to manifest. We do beg your pardon, but we are in your garden. We do beg your pardon, but we are in your garden. With the spider's response to my luring being tepid at best, and none coming close to leaving the safety of their burrows and exposing themselves to capture, it was clear that I needed to refine my methods. Like many spiders, Xamiatus are nocturnal, and while they spend the day skulking deep underground, come nightfall they move to the entrance of their burrows to wait for passing prey. With this in mind, it only made sense that my next foray took place in the bitter watches of the night, when the spiders were not only much closer to the surface, but primed to lunge at anything that ventures near. Mayhaps now they'd be a little more receptive to a lure. Okay, that worked out way better than I expected. I tried out my little luring technique, and on my very first attempt, I landed this absolutely gorgeous spider. This is Xamiatus rubifrons, the red-jawed, bearded wishbone spider, and it's one of the few cases where I think the common name is a bit more of a mouthful than the scientific one. But the common name and the scientific name both refer to the same trait. Rubifrons means red front, and what that refers to is the bright red coloration of this spider's mouth parts or chelicerae. Great timing, motorcyclist. Great timing. Yep, we all heard you. Why this spider has red jawed in its common name is obvious enough, but what could bearded possibly be referencing? Looking at the spider from above, especially at a distance, it's difficult to say. But when you get down to the spider's level, you may notice that parts of its underside, including the bases of the pedipalps and the front four legs, are adorned with a dense coat of long, pale hairs. Not the most conventional idea of a beard, I'll grant, but sufficiently barbigerous in its visage to warrant a reference in the spider's name all the same. Xamiatus rubifrons was first described in 1981, and was initially classified as part of the family Dipluridae, which at the time encompassed a broad suite of different species. Since then, however, it's been found that many of the taxa that had hitherto been lumped under the Diplurid banner were not all that closely related to one another, which led to many former subgroups of the Dipluridae being reclassified as separate families unto themselves, and Xamiatus was eventually moved to a family called the Microstigmatidae. The Microstigmatidae are by no means exclusive to Australia. They're also widespread in South America, and occur in parts of Africa and Asia too. For the most part, microstigmatids are small spiders, with Xamiatus, needless to say, being very substantial exceptions, and one of the few cases I can think of where an Australian spider outsizes its counterparts in Asia and South America. Xamiatus rubifrons is a megalomorph spider, so the same spider clade as things like funnel webs, trapdoor spiders, and tarantulas. And like all megalomorphs, they have a rather primitive respiratory system. It's quite prone to drying out, and it's not all that efficient either. The shortcomings of the megalomorph breathing system are a burden they bear from their distant prehistoric past. The ancient forerunners of spiders, basal chelicerates like the 515 million-year-old Mollisonia, were aquatic animals, and they breathed by means of a series of flap-like structures on their underside called book gills, a feature still used by modern-day horseshoe crabs, which are some of the oldest arachnids alive. All animals, be they aquatic, land-living, or anywhere in between, can only make use of oxygen when it's dissolved in water, and because of this, any respiratory surface through which oxygen is absorbed must remain moist in order to function. For primitive chelicerates, including both horseshoe crabs and the early ancestors of spiders, this was a non-issue. Being aquatic, their respiratory structures, the book gills, were perpetually submerged in water, and could thus trail out from their bodies, fully exposed, and absorb dissolved oxygen directly from their surroundings. But life, of course, didn't stay beneath the waves forever. With the oceans bursting with biodiversity and becoming an increasingly competitive and dangerous place, some enterprising creatures began to venture upon the barren shores of the primal Earth. But making the transition from sea to land was hardly a simple process, and one of the major hurdles involved breathing in this new and starkly different environment. Book gills can still function on land to a point, provided they stay moist. This is why horseshoe crabs, despite being aquatic animals, are nonetheless capable of surviving out of water for up to 4 days if conditions are adequate. But for an animal to live on land long-term, let alone permanently, these structures needed a little tweaking, and the ancestors of spiders over time modified the book gills into book lungs, which megalomorph spiders like Xamiatus remain fully reliant on to this very day. Book lungs, unlike book gills, are held inside cavities, which shelter them from the elements, making it possible for them to function on land, and they were thus instrumental in allowing the forerunners of spiders to break their ties with the water. That being said, the book lungs are still not completely protected from desiccation. In order for air to enter, each cavity has a large opening. This is, of course, an essential feature for breathing, but it comes with the unavoidable drawback of leaving the book lungs vulnerable to drying out and ceasing function should the spider stay too exposed for too long. So these spiders are restricted to being burrowing ambush predators. They aren't built to handle a long, drawn-out pursuit, but what they can do, and they do extremely well, is lurk at the entrance of a burrow and then launch out at prey with an explosive burst of incredible speed and power. and their fangs, like those of all megalomorphs, are held roughly parallel to each other and strike downwards, and the spider can slam them down into prey with tremendous force. These spiders can apparently be quite defensive, but this one so far is showing no signs of that. So, I think it might be time to get up close and personal. Aside from its initial description and some subsequent revisions, Xamiatus rubifrons has been largely overlooked by the world of academia, and certain aspects of its biology, including the nature of its venom, remain poorly understood. And with the spider's venom a yet unknown entity, one would probably consider it prudent to keep their hands well clear. Besides, irrespective of venom potency, those large, downward-striking fangs would be capable of some significant mechanical damage. But despite being an overly cautious person in just about every other facet of my life, when it comes to spiders, I do have a tendency to push the boundaries, and I couldn't resist the urge to hold this awe-inspiring arachnid upon my hand. And for a spider that first caught my attention in a large part due to the rumours I heard about their nasty temperaments, I've got to say she was incredibly cooperative. Typically, when handling spiders on video, I have no qualms with presenting to the camera at the same time. That's how I've showcased many huntsmen, as well as her royal legginess, the giant water spider. But it's another ballgame with something like Xamiatus, and it's not, as you may expect, because of any risk the spider could pose to me. Quite the reverse, in fact. It's a matter of concern for the spider's safety. Xamiatus, like many megalomorphs, is a heavy-bodied, ground-dwelling spider, and falls are not something it's built to handle, so losing its foothold and being dropped onto a hard surface, even from a fairly modest height, could prove to be fatal, which is why I made sure to handle this spider much closer to the ground, and without the distraction of having to talk to the camera while keeping the spider in hand. For reasons likely connected to her megalomorph physiology, I soon noticed that the spider was beginning to grow weary, her movements becoming ever slower and more infrequent. That right there was the cue I needed to tell me her time in the limelight was up, and she was now overdue for a well-earned rest. So without further ado, okay, maybe a little bit of further ado thanks to her terrible sense of direction, I guided the spider to the entrance of her burrow, and bid her a fond farewell as she disappeared into the cozy subterranean abode from whence she came. In some ways, my encounter with Xamiatus rubifrons didn't quite go as expected. The species' allegedly high-strung temperament and threatening hisses were nowhere to be seen. Now don't get me wrong, these spiders definitely can be very defensive and are capable of hissing, I've seen it on video. But this individual at the very least was more skittish than anything else. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't at least momentarily disappointed that I didn't get a hiss or a threat display on camera. But at the end of the day, that's not what this channel is about. Animals don't have to be showing off their most intimidating and frightful side to be interesting, and especially for creatures like spiders, which are already feared enough as is. It's the more mundane aspects of their existence that, I think, need to be highlighted a little more. So perhaps it's perfectly in line with my channel's ethos that a species of spider who first came to my attention due to rumours of its exceedingly nasty temper showed itself to me as naught but a meek, shy, and timid little creature. There is much beauty in that which is slow, mundane, and uneventful, and when you come to appreciate it, the natural world becomes all the more captivating. If you want to learn about another one of Australia's forgotten spiders, then head on over to this video about the giant water spider Megadolomedes trux. And if you want to dive deep into the spider's fascinating history, then take a look at this video here. And don't forget to subscribe so you can stay tuned for future content. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on my next adventure.